On today's episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking all about training programming. Now, on previous episodes of the show, we've talked about, is it important in terms of your exercise selection, how you actually create and establish that workout? Is the order actually of any importance? So if you want to kind of delve into that side of thing at a more holistic level, you can check that previous episode of the show out. Now, what I want to do in this episode of the show is dive into a little bit more specifics and really talk about if you're training multiple body parts in one particular session, should you group them all together, or is it best to split them up? That's what we're going to be talking about and answering that specific question in today's episode of the show. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, give the video a like, a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button as well and turn those notifications on. That would be absolutely awesome. If you're listening to this on the podcast, a rating and a review on whichever platform you listen to the show on would be equally awesome as well. But for now, let's get right into this specific episode. Now, if you are someone who's trying to build muscle, you're trying to get the most out of what you do in the gym. Now, clearly there are some important big rocks to focus on. What we're talking about in this episode of the show is not one of those big rocks. So if you're just someone who's trying to get started, trying to find your feet in the gym, this is probably a level of detail you don't want to go into. This is like minutia stuff that could help, could provide some little bit of benefit to you, but it's not where the lion's share of your attention should be focused. You should be focusing in on basically picking exercises that suit your goal and achieve that and help you grow towards building more muscle or perk glutes or whatever it is that you're trying to get to. You're selecting exercises that fit that scenario. You're also doing enough training volume so that you're creating enough training stimulus for your body to adapt and build muscle and grow. These are the things that you really want to be focusing in on. So if you just did that and you'd worked hard over a period of time, then yes, you would build muscle. You'd start to build a great physique. But if you want to take it to a level of nuance, then this is going to be something you might want to focus in on just a tiny little bit. Now, most of your workouts will incorporate more than one muscle group. If we take leg day, for example, you're going balls deep on various different exercises. You might be doing squats, leg extensions, you might be doing seated leg curls, you might be doing RDLs, you might be doing hip thrusts, a lot of different exercises going in there that are biasing different muscle groups. Now, it might be something to say you've got a very quad dominant squat. So you've selected a squat for one of your main quad movements. You've then said, I'm going to pair that with a leg extension just so you get working through the full contractile range of that muscle. You then may be picking an RDL to work the hamstring through a lengthened position. You might be picking it with a seated leg curl to work it into a shortened position. And then you might supplement it with some form of, let's say, hip thrust, or whether you want to work on calves, whatever your particular interest is. So you've got basic construct in that leg workout of some quad type stuff, some hamstring type stuff, and some glute type stuff. Let's say those are the broad muscle groups you're working. Now, obviously there's going to be some crossover as you go through each one of those exercises, that they're not just exclusively one muscle, although maybe you're finding some isolation exercises which are pretty much isolating one muscle. So how should you split them up? Now, the first thing I'll say is that there is no right or wrong answer to this particular question. You can do both. What the important thing to remember is that it's just different, and different is fine. It just depends on where you want to focus most of your attention. As I said, when you're getting into the weeds of this sort of stuff, you're getting balls deep into some of the technicalities of training programming. Maybe it's beyond what you actually need, and just picking that simple training program, simple exercises executed effectively is where you want to be. So what's the argument for pairing them together? So if you were maybe constructing that leg workout I was talking about, you group all the quad stuff together, then the hamstrings, and then you finish off with the glutes. Maybe you do that. Now, that would present itself in the sense that you may initiate more muscle damage because you're working one muscle group straight after the other. That might be something that you want to achieve in that particular workout. Muscle damage is one pathway to building muscle. It might also be like a real simple thing that logically, with the way that your gym is laid out, it makes sense for you to do that. I know some people, some clients where the equipment is in strange places and you've got to go off different floors in different directions to get to specific pieces of equipment. So it might make sense just logically to walk your way around the gym in a certain sequence that lends itself to pairing those exercises together. Obviously, it could be completely the other way as well. There also might be like a psychological impact to the whole thing as well. You might be someone who, you like the feeling you're getting from your first quad exercise, and then you like adding to that feeling a bit of a pump maybe that you like from doubling up on that particular muscle group. Again, is perfectly fine. Remember that we are talking about minutiae here. We're into the weeds of some of the detail. It's not really the primary focus where you want to start. This is not the fundamental basics. So the argument for no might be that if you imagine that you are working a particular muscle group, you do squats, you do those squats quite heavy, then if you intersect training quads with, let's say, a hamstring movement that's not had so much work with a squat movement, then potentially you're giving that quad a chance to rest and recuperate. So then when you come back to do your leg extensions, potentially you could lift a few more repetitions, a little bit more load, and then over the course of time, that's going to be more progressive overload, and that is one of the cornerstones of trying to build muscle. Now, that's not going to be true for everybody. Everybody is not maybe going to respond in that way and be able to eke out those 1 or 2 extra reps from that little bit of extra rest. For some people, it's just not going to matter whatsoever, and it's just a case of they're just going to get on with it, and it doesn't matter too much what order they do it in. And again, it could come down to specifically for preference as well. But one of the other things that you might want to think about is that how the different exercises you select affect each other. So for example, when you are doing a hip thrust, there is a bit of like hamstring involvement. There is a little bit of quad involvement in that, to like stabilize the movement, but also to support with the actual lift itself as well. So if you are someone who wants to focus a little bit more on your glutes, then if you actually just obliterate your hamstrings and your quads to within an inch of their life, they're not really going to offer you much support in that hip thrust movement. Now, if hip thrusts aren't really a thing for you, then tagging them on at the end of a workout is perfectly fine. But if that glute movement was something that you really wanted to focus in on, it was important to you, then maybe you could, for example, split up your hamstring exercises. So you do that kind of more mass lifting exercise, let's call it that for want of a better phrase, and then you put your seated leg curls afterwards, where you don't actually need necessarily those hamstrings to support other movements later in the workout. So again, it's just about thinking more nuanced about overall, okay, what makes sense? What makes sense in terms of my programming for my enjoyment, what makes sense in terms of the way the gym's laid out, these practical things. And then after that, you're thinking about, okay, what's best for the workout itself? What's going to generate the best possible results? So when it comes to what body part you should focus in on, the answer really is a little bit of A and a little bit of B. You can kind of do either one. It just really depends on what your preference is. You're either going to go down a route where potentially it's going down a pathway of muscle damage, a little bit more of a pump, that sort of thing, or you're going to go potentially down a little bit of a road of a bit more progressive overload, or you're going to optimize the ability for you to create output of other exercises by thinking a little bit more about the order. So there really is no right or wrong answer when it comes to this one. It's more a case of understanding the factors that are involved. What is it that you want to get out of that workout? What's your goal? And then aligning everything to achieve that. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that, really. So hopefully this episode of the show really helps you out a little bit and kind of gave you something else to think about when it comes to this aspect of training programming. Now, if you've got any questions about training programming, anything I've said in this video, or you want more clarity on anything, if you're on YouTube, drop a comment below. If you are listening on a podcast, head over to Instagram at iron_paradise_fitness. Drop me a DM and I'll gladly help you out when it comes to answering questions about training programming or anything like that. Also, what I'll do is I'll put some links into the show notes below One will be a link to my online calorie calculator. Now, I know that quite a lot of people struggle with knowing how many calories they need in order to achieve their goals, whether that's putting yourself in a surplus so you can build the most amount of muscle in the most optimal way possible, whether it's trying to find out what your maintenance calories are, or whether it's trying to calculate what the right calorie deficit is, plus all of the macros on top of that. There's a huge amount of calorie calculators out there, ebooks, all that sort of stuff. So what I'm going to do is give you a link to my online calorie calculator. It's totally free, it's yours. And then once you use that as well, I'll send you a free calorie guide so you can get some information on what calories and macros actually are, how to read nutrition labels, other aspects of nutrition that you really need to understand in order to start getting results. Plus, I'll send you a couple of recipe packs, I'll send you a free 4-week training program, and I'll also send you a guide on how to manage those cravings, which I'm sure you will come across if you are dieting at any part of your future or right now maybe as well. And as well, if you want to make a donation to the podcast, you can do so as well by clicking one of the links in the show notes below. And when you make a donation, you can ask a question. Just fill out the notes section with whatever question you want to ask, and I will answer it and maybe even make it an episode of the podcast. So for now, all I'm going to say is thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. Keep living the lean life, and I'll see you for the next episode of the show.